it's often the case that as we come closer towards the end of the retreat and talk about it, the planning mind gets triggered. And so we wanted to support you to renounce planning mind. We still have 1.5 days. And, it's often the case that we confuse planning with awakening or planning with happiness. And there's this classic story of everyone gathering together at a certain time after the Buddha died to share with each other all the teachings they heard and to agree on that. And Ananda, who had listened to all the Dharma talks and had a phenomenal memory, couldn't be included because he wasn't a stream enterer. He hadn't awakened to that freedom. And so Ananda was like, oh, I have to practice diligently and practice and practice. And then he was going to rest. He'd been practicing diligently and then he was going to rest. And so it's said that he lifted up his foot to place himself on his bed, and in that a moment awoke. And I'm just saying that because sometimes we have all these ideas about when a moment of opening can happen, or when opening into that freedom of no greed, hatred, and delusion, and that nirvana it is just opens for us, that it's unplanned. What we do know is that the condition for that is being present in the moment. Renouncing planning, unless you're going to sit down and say, I'm going to plan this now, I'm going to contemplate it and come up with something, and then I'm going to bring it to closure. So we also know that thinking isn't the condition for awakening, because otherwise we'd all be arahants, which is someone who's completed the journey totally, no greed, hatred, and delusion left. So it's just really a lovely reminder that any moment is the moment of the path, and that we can't foresee when conditions come into being, the factors come into being. And I was going to talk about that a little bit as the fourth foundation. Oh, I was going to talk about the first foundation, but let me a little bit go with the stream. Oh, thank you. Is it okay if I take my mask off? There's something very deep to me about that teaching, that we have no idea when the conditions of the 7 factors are going to come into place, like pieces of the jigsaw coming into connection and creating the conditions for the mind to open. That we have no idea when it's going to happen. And just to quote someone who was so open about his own awakening, or so is Thich Nhat Hanh actually, and Eckhart Tolle, was standing in front of a window, deep in suffering, and something in his mind just came into balance, and he discerned what suffering really was, and his mind opened. We have no idea when that will happen, and there's something about us recollecting our practice and respecting and venerating it. Because that's one of the conditions. Like, for some of you who weren't here yesterday, we practiced the practice of appreciative joy, where we recollect our generosity and our virtue and our loving kindness or our caring. And we take particular instances and really reflect on them and feel them, embody them, and wish that they might grow and deepen and guide us. There is a lot in the Visuddhimagga that both of us have quoted about this recollection and other recollections. And Mel talked about some of them last night, the blessing of the Dharma, recollecting the blessing of coming to the Dharma. And another is that we don't know when we're going to die. And a member a Sangha member, Cynthia Embray-Lavoie, was on the early board of the centre I founded in Northampton, and had breast cancer, and it seems that it has moved to her brain, and she started to have seizures. And those of us who've been on the board of Dharmadena or any board know how much work it is. And we don't know when that's going to happen. And she said, I can't practice. She was on Caring Bridge, and she wrote, I can't practice. We don't know when that's going to happen. And recollecting that. And these recollections, to come back again, are based on recollecting the goodness of our practice, the goodness and the wholesomeness of our intentions and our wishes. Because if we don't have that recollection, we don't have the ground to support us in our dropping into the surrender to practice, to this moment. Why do I want to? Because I have these such beautiful and deep wishes to care unconditionally, not to be harbored by my judgment, and to continue to deepen my forgiveness, to acknowledge my capacities to make an effort. I don't know when the consequences and fruition will come, but I know that I can make that effort. And especially in the context of a retreat, where we have a whole day and a half. And anytime, anytime. But I don't want to kind of set up this hierarchy in a way of I'm bad if I don't. I don't want to set that up, because our minds can so easily go there. Oh, I'm so bad in my daily life, I hardly sit, or I'm so bad, I'm always rushing and doing this, that, and the next thing. What would it be, not to deny that, but what would it be to balance that with the recollections of our wish for freedom, for caring, for loving ourselves, for honoring and respecting life, ourselves as one part of life, to every day recollect our goodness. Because in that relationship, then we're called to continue to support that. But if we're always seeing as what is negative, then it's more difficult. Then, not that we can't, because all of us have come to the Dharma, and many of us from places of great difficulty. So not to say that isn't possible. It is. And in coming to the Dharma, we are offered the recollection of our goodness, so that we can be called into this renunciation whenever we can, at a bus stop if you're taking a bus, or waiting in line at Safeway or the local health food market, or in recycling, or at a traffic light. Ruth would say that to me over and over again when she gave me driving meditation. When we're driving, we got into the car and she would say, "What are you thinking about?" I don't know what I would be thinking about. She said, "Why aren't you thinking about the fact that you are going to be driving for your own liberation, for shopping, for going to the park for a walk, for going to visit a friend, and that the earth has given you these particular paths with many, many beings' labor called a road to drive along, and that you are umbrellaed by the sky, and the earth has offered you her resources as fuel. Why aren't you contemplating that?" And when I lived at Plum Village, that was the practice. You couldn't just get into your car and turn the key. That you had to sit and acknowledge the purpose of your driving, why you were driving. And you never could use a car Plum Village just for, "Oh, I want to go into town." We would use the car to be in service, to go and do a chore, and then maybe we could take a bit of time and walk around a village or do something like that. So it's not like the retreat of this dedication can't be in our daily lives, in how we do our daily lives. It can be in whatever chore, and the blessing that we do before eating, just like, I know there are times I forget, but mostly I bless before I eat. Because it's beautiful to bless, but for that invitation again to be present for a moment, to offer metta, to offer gratitude. Again, it's so easy to name something like this and then immediately to trigger shame or judgment or deficiency. How can we, here's my question to us, how can we honor ourselves by offering ourselves a vision without that vision triggering our shame? How can we? Because I know when we think about liberating ourselves from capitalism, changing the structures of homophobia, racism, classism, ableism, xenophobia, just to name a few, there's no shame in that vision of co-creating cultures and structures that are deeply respectful of our beautiful selves. And yet, when we think of ourselves individually, it's so easy to lose that. And maybe this is some of the most important work that we're being called to. I think at some point, and I can't remember when, we both spoke about the cycle of openings happening and then that opening lifting up trauma and wounding. That's certainly been true for me. So it's not that I don't expect when I have an opening for something to arise. Not all the time, but some of the time. It's so helpful to name it as this isn't a reflection of my deficiency. if I feel caught in fear or terror, in pain, paralyzed. It is rather an expression in the calling for healing, what has arisen, in order for that healing to become the conditions for our freedom. So, in a way then, whatever is arising for us has got nothing to do with the conditioned thought that when we're having these feelings, we're failures, deficient, terrible practitioners, and everything to do for the call for healing. And then we know that the path for that healing is that twofold, being present and being kind. And if we can't be present and kind, then we're patient. And we call in our faith to hold through what's difficult. I remember when I divorced, I said to someone, I can't hardly believe that more than 50% of people go through this pain. It was excruciating to divorce my wife. Or not that I divorced my wife, we separated. That's a much better way of talking about it. We decided we needed to be on different paths. And it does feel like a miracle to be on the other side of it, that we heal. Almost every one of us who is separated has healed and had another relationship, or been happy single. I don't even like to have it that way, because the way we're friends, what does single mean anyway? Not partnered. When we're committed in deeply, like warriors, to remember our beauty, our magnificence, then we know that we can call on the strength to hold what is broken. This is a moment-by-moment path. We can't do it conceptually. We do it in the moment, in relating to ourselves. And in that relationship, we are really clear that there are obstacles to the heart that are calling for healing, and our friends of presence and love and generosity and virtue, the friend of patience and renunciation, of being truthful and ethical, of compassion and equanimity and joy. We have those friends, and we can call on them, and just like calling on your phone, like, oh, I really need to talk to a friend right now, right? And then you call and they're not there. Then you're like, okay, I'll wait for them to call back, I'll leave a message. We can call on these friends all the time, over and over again, and then reflect on how beautiful it is to call them. That's how I've built patience. Just calling and calling, and it feels like no one is answering, and calling and calling. And then I reflect, oh, it's so beautiful that I'm calling these energies, even if I don't feel them. I love that. The single most beautiful, apart from awareness and mindfulness, the beautiful support in this is non-distraction. Just being diligent about being present wherever we are, on the toilet, in the shower, in the car, picking up a kettle. Is when we're picking it up, we're picking it up. And so we continue in that practice, especially today, as the mind is called into distraction. Then in this honoring of our beauty, we bring our minds back, not in judgment and blame, but in honoring this amazing vision we have that we want to embody. As Mel said, not just for ourselves, but for the world. And for every time we forget, for a week, a month, a year, we forgive ourselves. For every time we forget right speech or break a precept, we forgive ourselves. We account for it and we forgive ourselves. For after this talk, getting super distracted in some conversation, we forgive ourselves. There is never a good reason not to love ourselves. Never, ever. And we're truthful and honest about the work that we need to do, which is part of love. As I think about this being our last day, then I think somehow of the sacred bond between us. The network of how we're holding each other. And as we move into meditation, let us relax then into the more formal practice for these last 15 minutes. allowing all the words to flow away, coming into a full relatedness with the body or breath, whatever your anchor is. Present to the sensations. Open and receptive. Thank you.